I am Edward Roske, CEO at Argonaut Interrel, and your entertainment for this afternoon, your edutainment will be Glenn Schwartzberg. So I will be talking over all of the high-level, general, big picture information, telling entirely too many stories, going off on a whole bunch of tangents. Actually, funny thing about tangents, it comes from the Greek word, wait,
yes, that's enough that word, yes.
Okay, back to what I was saying. We're going to cover lots of technical commentary. Glenn Schwartzberg will be doing an awesome demo of some of the new functionality in 21C.
Oh, I am? Crap.
Yes, note to Glenn Schwartzberg. Hey, Glenn, queue up a 21C demo and show some really cool stuff in just a second. I assure you we did rehearse this, but we will pretend as if we did not throughout the entire next hour. If any of you are not aware, we have changed our name slightly. We are now Argonaut Interrel. Interrel has merged with a few other different firms, all world-class experts in their niche areas. So we have been around for 24 plus years, founded in 1997, been around for 24 years, focusing entirely on that EPM space. We want to continue to do that. That's what we do. That's what we know. That's what we love. We're going to continue to focus on EPM. But nowadays, you rarely have a standalone EPM system. Quite often, you're combining it on top of an ERP, or you're passing data back and forth to your sales and operational plan with your supply chain, or you're doing workforce planning that requires talking to human capital, or you're taking all of your sales and revenue information, passing it back and forth through the analytics system. We had two options. We could either start trying to figure out how to do all that other stuff. That would have been a massive failure. I've seen companies try it. It never turns out terribly well. Or we can go grab companies that do those other things that we can combine us all under one name. So we are still the Interrel that you know and love, focused on EPM. We just have other companies that do those other things that are now all joined together underneath that Argonaut banner. So let's go back in time. A brief history of time as told by Edward and corrected by Glenn Schwartzberg. And we will have a furious debate on what was actually in 7, what was in 3, what was in 9, what was in 11. So if you actually go back to 1991, which is when Jim Dorian and Bob Earl were over at Price Waterhouse, long before it was Price Waterhouse Coopers, long before they decided that was too many syllables, reduced it to PwC. Jim Dorian and Bob Earl were auditors, and they were going into companies and being told, oh, this number that used to just be written down in a bunch of ledger paper, well, it now is being in the general ledger system. So they'd say, well, where does this number come from? Like, oh, it comes from this series of transactions. And they were good with that because they could easily see, oh, you want to know where that number on cost of goods sold comes from? We can print it out on green bar paper. We can easily see it's these 17 transactions. What they started to notice in the late 80s and early 90s is that now when they were saying, well, where does this number come from, cost of goods sold? The answer would be, oh, it comes from cell F17 in our Lotus 123 spreadsheet. Or a couple of the really up and coming people were saying, oh, it's even in Excel and it's in cell B14. It's really hard to audit a spreadsheet cell. It's hard to figure out all the formulas, how to figure out the links. And they were seeing this massive explosion of people using spreadsheets, not just to visualize information, not just to be a viewer to grids, but seeing them as places to store business logic, seeing them actually become databases. So the advent of the database is not what led to Essbase. It was really the advent of spread marts, really databases being used as spreadsheets. So they got together and they said, well, what if we created a product? So they founded a company called Arbor Software back in 1991. And they said, what if we created a product that could be a spreadsheet for databases? And they released that to the world in 1992, which is why you will hear 2 different years argued, 91 or 92. They released Essbase in 92 to be a spreadsheet database. And the original version of Essbase, the actual name, there wasn't originally an E. It was the letter S, and base. And the problem was everyone kept pronouncing it Essbase. And they said, well, that's wrong. So they went and stuck an E at the beginning. And they figured, well, at least people will pronounce it correctly. And then they said, well, the E should probably stand for something. So they said it stood for extended. So now we say Essbase stands for an extended spreadsheet database. It is one common place to put all of your spreadsheet information. So you're not using a spreadsheet as a solution. You're back to using spreadsheets for what they're good at, which is just a viewer to information.
I always thought it stood for number buddy.
Oh, there's your even more useless bit of trivia. Never ask a random bunch of people what you should name something. Otherwise, you'll end up with mixed spreadsheety face. So they asked a bunch of Arbor employees, there was a contest and said, everybody contribute your name and we'll determine what we're going to call the product based on the most submitted name. The name that won was Number Buddy. And they're like, yeah, note to self, never ask employees to name something. So they eventually went with Essbase and then eventually went with Essbase. But yes, us people that are really old, like Lynn Schwartzberg and I, we're still thinking of it as Number Buddy. So they took that spreadsheet information and said, we're going to take and we're going to put it into cubes, things that have dimensionality, stuff in the rows, stuff in the columns, stuff in the pages, but more. You could have 4 dimension, 5 dimension, 10 dimension, 50 dimension, 100 dimension. Well, probably not back in the 90s. In the early versions, you actually had to do things like hold 100% of your index in memory, but eventually got to the point where it was a true full-blown database. Now, it is an interesting side note. They weren't sure if they had built a database. They actually called up the Codd Institute. If you ever heard of Dr. I think it's E.F. Codd, Edgar Codd, he's the father of the relational database. And he set out the rules for if you're going to have a true relational database management system, you must have the following things. You must have the ability to join. You must have records and fields. Anyway, they called him up and they said, we're pretty sure we made a database. Can you tell us if we did? Because it meets hardly any of your criteria. You can't run SQL at it. It's not optimized for storage. It's more kind of optimized for analysis. Please tell us what we've done. So Dr. Codd and his son, the Codd Institute, came out, looked at it and said, you've indeed created a database, but you've created a totally different class of database. Unlike any database that's ever been invented from the dawn of when we came up with it until now, those are all databases optimized for transactions. Those are OLTP, online transaction processing databases. What you have created is OLAP, online analytical processing database. You created a database that is no slower or faster at the top or at the bottom. You can ask it for total net income. You can ask it for cost of goods sold for one product, one SKU. All the data will come back at the same speed. And thus the OLAP world was born. Now, there were other products out there that did multidimensionality, but they weren't optimized for analysis. When did System W get created? The late 60s, I think. It was a ComShare database, ran on a mainframe, and it could handle 4-ish dimensions, but it wasn't optimized for speed of analysis. It wasn't optimized to think the way of business people thought. But because Jim Dorian and Bob Earl had the Price Waterhouse background, they said, we are going to make it a database that business people understand. It doesn't require SQL, doesn't require a high price, but deservedly so IT department, business people are going to be able to run it because those are the people that are running spreadsheets. There was an odd thing that happened, taking this walk down memory lane. There's an odd thing that happened in the 90s, which is Essbase became seen as a tool of finance. There was actually nothing in the original version that made it any financial. Anything that had dimensionality, a number with stuff in the rows, stuff in the columns, you could store it in an Essbase cube. The reason was those were the people using spreadsheets back in the 90s. So Lotus 123 soon followed and destroyed by Microsoft Excel. Excel dominated the finance, the planning, the accounting, the entire office of the CFO. Also, that was who Jim Dorian and Barbara Earl knew how to talk to. They knew how to speak financial language so they could best sell it to those organizations. Well, a few other companies, things like Cognos Business Objects, I'll tell you more about them in a second, they started coming in and saying, well, we can't get into the finance department. It's dominated by 2 companies. The kind of custom companies, Arbor dominates those custom solutions. The pre-built ones are dominated by this company from the 80s called Hyperion. We can't compete with those. We're going to go tackle the rest of the organizations. You started hearing Cognos and Business Objects be seen as more kind of reporting analysis technologies. But whether you were in a Cognos cube and a Datum D cube, a Business Objects universe, they were all cube technologies. They all could do functionally the same thing. It was more just kind of how they got pitched. Which takes us up to 1998. So in 1998, Arbor had been around for roughly 6 years. Hyperion had been around for roughly 20. And over that 6-year period, Arbor had gone from 0 in revenue to around 500 million. Hyperion had gone from 0 in revenue to roughly 500 million. It took them just different spans of time. Arbor Software, Silicon Valley rapid startup, the type of company that you expect to be run out of Sunnyvale, California. Rapid disruptor, rapid tech, move things, break things, go make a big splash. and they were founded by Silicon Valley tech startup people. Hummer Winblad was which has recently come up in the news for a totally different reason. Hummer Winblad was the kind of source behind a lot of that Arbor original support. Over on the Hyperion side, this was out of Stamford, Connecticut. This was run by a bunch of CPAs, a bunch of people who said, yep, slow, steady growth wins the race. You don't want to see rapid growth. It's going to cause a sine curve. You should be growing slowly as is humanly possible. Accounting rarely changes. Let's not change anything. Well, and Hyperion did have one advantage over Arbor. Even though Arbor was growing faster, they were getting more buzz. Even though they're about the same size, Hyperion became synonymous with prepackaged planning and prepackaged consolidation. They had two products at the time, not the original versions or the original names, but that's another story. Their original products they had in '98 were Hyperion Pillar for planning, Hyperion Enterprise for consolidation. So Arbor and Hyperion got together and they said, we should merge rather than fight. Let's just bring our companies together and we can completely dominate this entire space. Well, it took them about 9 years to figure out how to be married. The cultures were just dramatically different. Again, one company, slow, steady wins the race. Accounting side, other Arbor, let's just move fast and break things. And they just came together to really compete in the outside world. So once they got over their internal hiccups, they said, oh, we have one differentiator. And by the way, other companies started coming up with products. Cognos started having its own planning product. Datum started getting bigger on the scene. Business Objects started creating some of its own. But they said, we have one differentiator that all those other companies don't. We have the world's greatest multidimensional database. We have Essbase and they don't. Provided we don't irritate anyone outside of our realm, we can go dominate and we can beat the Cognoses and the Business Objects. And that takes us up to 2007. Now, in 2007, the EPM and BI worlds were dominated by companies that had this singular focus on EPM and BI. Companies like Business Objects, Cognos, and Datum that believed because they were the biggest, they were the strongest, they were the most intelligent, most agile players in the EPM space, they didn't have to change. Quite simply, they didn't have to adapt. They didn't ever have to do anything different. So this is, by the way, we're doing sharks versus dinosaurs for the day. This is Dino, and you have to look on your camera to appreciate the awesomeness of this. This is Dino, and he'll be playing the part of Cognos. Hi, my name is Dino, and I don't ever have to change. There's never going to be a massive disruption, and since I'm the biggest, the baddest guy on the block, even though I have tiny little short arms, I will just devour anything that comes my way. And this is Sharky, and he'll be playing the part of Cognos. I'm sorry, this is Dino playing Cognos. This is Sharky. He'll be playing the part of Hyperion. Hi, I'm Sharky, playing the part of Hyperion. I thought for a while that I was a dinosaur, but then I realized I was a shark. And as long as I stay in my tank, my little small EPM tank, I'm going to be fine because my tank is safe. And I know for an absolute fact that a shark cannot outgrow its tank. I know this because I read it on Facebook. Ack, it's a meteor coming. No, you can't count Cognos. It's 3 meteors. One is named Oracle, one is named IBM. And wait, I think there's a third meteor, might be named SAP. So what we have is a situation where there's going to be a massive disruption. So Dino's response, well, I'm just going to stomp around ignorantly. And I, Cognos Dino, will always dominate. Ah, but I was safe in my tank. How will I ever swim around in a much bigger ocean? So Dino got destroyed by Meteor IBM and was never heard from again. Sharky, on the other hand, turned out he didn't die from Meteor Oracle, but his tank got destroyed. Huh, never realized my tank was actually holding me back. My tank was stunting my growth. And turns out not everything you read online is true. And once set free to dominate, Sharky, I mean Hyperion and Essbase, began to dominate that EPM space. But to do it, they had to keep evolving and swimming. Just keep swimming, just keep swimming. They had to keep evolving. And by doing so, Hyperion and Essbase outlasted all those long gone dinosaurs. Cognos still technically exists in some form inside of IBM, keeps making periodic little resurgence. Business Objects still technically exists inside of SAP somewhere, but they have been dying. But free from the confines of that tiny little tank, Hyperion and Essbase flourished. Oracle in 2007, when they acquired and broke Hyperion and Essbase out of that tank, 2007, when they acquired it, they said, you don't realize the gold mine that you were sitting on. You were so worried about staying in your tank, to carry this shark metaphor way too far, too worried about staying in your tank because you were worried about offending Microsoft, you didn't realize that you could actually break free and dominate. They were so afraid of it that at the time when Oracle acquired Hyperion, they had renamed Essbase Hyperion System 9 Business Intelligence Plus. They didn't even believe in the name Essbase. So Oracle, when they acquired it, everybody said, yep, let's go ahead and write the rest in peace for Essbase. By the way, it had been rumored many, many times over the past, but in 2007, yet another flourish, like, yep, Oracle is going to kill off Essbase. What Hyperion didn't do good enough, trying to destroy the name, Oracle's going to destroy it. Oracle said, no, there's an amazing thing. We can have Essbase be that lens through which our competitors view their data. And they renamed their product from Hyperion System 9 Business Intelligence Plus to Oracle Essbase. And it became the basis for everything. They said, we're going to make sure that all of our new planning solutions, all of our new profitability solutions, all of our solutions that we're creating, anything that is in that office of the CFO or anything that requires taking a number and putting something in the rows and the columns, it's going to be Essbase behind the scenes. And it has been thriving, been flourishing ever since, although it has gone on a few different journeys kind of within the Oracle world. In the words of Donald Frost, if you think it's sad to ponder about past glory, just think of how sad it is to not have past glory. I look at all of the changes. Every time somebody counted Essbase out, there was was it Essbase 6 or Essbase 7 when Hyperroll said we found a better way to add Essbase data. Was that early Essbase 7?
That was 7 with the advent of ASO, so 11.7.1.2.
Yeah, so Hyperroll said, you guys are still adding the way you did back in the 1990s. In 92, we have this new, better way. So at the time they came up, you actually extract all of your data to a separate Hyperroll cube and they added up your data faster. Hyperion said, well, wait a second, you're right. We can come up with a new way to aggregate. We can do a whole lot more in memory. And then to Glenn's point, they came up with aggregate storage. So the product has constantly been evolving. As I said, when you go back to the original days, it wasn't even really a true spreadsheet double-click interface that we all know and love nowadays. It was report scripts. Back in the early days, there was very little you could do till they created Application Manager. You had situations where, what was it? I think Essbase 4 was the first one to allow you not to store your whole index in memory. What other memorable things am I forgetting, Glenn?
So if we start at the beginning, the very first thing was that we were running on OS 2 operating system. Yes. And this massive spreadsheet system called Lotus 123 and on Macs, as well as PCs. Mm-hmm. You know, I remember, oh, by the way, just for everybody, between Edward and I, we have about 60 years of Essbase experience. It doesn't mean that we know a lot. It just means we're old, or at least I'm old. But
yeah,
you know,
I had no gray in the beard 30 years ago.
So I started with 3.1.1, which was the advent of App Manager. We went to and some things were glory, some things were not so good. We got to version 4.01, which lasted for 2 hours, I think, before it got pulled back with so many bugs in it that we had to wait to get to 4.1. Version 5, when we first got dynamic calc members in an outline. Before that, we had to aggregate everything. We get to version 7, where we got the first inklings of EAS, and nobody wanted to go to it. But we also got in 7.1.2 this major release with the introduction of ASO cubes, that if you made any change to them, you had to completely rebuild them and reload all data. But it got better. We got System 9, where instead of being able to insert my 6 floppy disks and say yes, 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 yes to do an install, I had this integrated system that took an engineering degree in computer science to figure out how to install it. And of course, with the entitlement fees to be able to use that version. Then we get to, then Oracle bought us. And when Oracle bought Hyperion, we thought it was the second death of Essbase because they had Oracle OLAP. We said, oh, well, they're just buying it to get rid of the competition. But in truth, as Edward had said, it became the strategic product and you never hear about Oracle OLAP anymore. As a matter of fact, the latest release with the federated partitions back to AWS is even better than what Oracle OLAP used to be. But then we got to when Oracle bought them, it stagnated for a couple of years, and then all of a sudden this huge insurgence of new feature functionality. We got better ASO cubes, we got hybrid cubes, to today where we have it in the cloud, as well as on-prem with version 21 with fully functional hybrid, and you can have dataless cubes now. We have things that we've asked for years like shadow processes and other things. So it really has evolved, and you can see that it is becoming more and more robust with every release.
Well, and Glenn, I noticed you skipped versions 8 and version 10.
What version 8 and version 10?
Okay, so
it was all based on numbering and tying to other products. So,
yeah, so there actually was a version 8. It was a version 8 of Brio. So when they acquired Brio, it was on version 8. And they're like, okay, we need to have a version that unites the Brio products, and they renamed them into interactive reporting, production product reporting. And we don't want to still have it be version 8. So that's when System 9 came out. So if you're ever wondering why was there no Hyperion or Essbase 8, there technically was. It was Brio 8. But yeah, there never was a 10 because at that point they went on to Oracle numbering. On a related note, while there may be some internal versioning, there's not a version 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, or 18 either. There is a 12, there's a 19. There is no 20 because nobody should ever name anything after 2020. And we're back to 21, which takes us to the present. There are a couple of different routes that you can take with Essbase. There is EPM 11.2. And EPM 11.2 is supported through December 2032, I think, at the moment, and they keep pushing it out. Their goal is, if people are still actively using it, we're not going to force them to go to the cloud. We're going to let them keep using it for as long as they want. If they want a ton of new functionality, yeah, they're probably going to go to the cloud. If they don't want to deal with servers anymore, yeah, they're probably going to go to the cloud. But if they're happy with on-prem, their servers haven't expired, cool, you can go to 11.2. The thing about 11.2, there isn't an 11.2 of Essbase. EPM 11.2 still uses Essbase 11.124. They did announce at Kscope it will use 21C at some point. There is no specific date, but it is officially there on the roadmap. Now, keep in mind, safe harbor, they could make the entire roadmap up in a fever dream, but presuming it goes forward as expected, it will start sitting on 21C. If you only had Essbase, the only real reason to go to 11.2, if there's some functionality that you need out of 11.2, like, I don't know, FR reports or something, but even that functionality against true complete standalone Essbase isn't really there. In general, if you really want to stay in an on-prem world, if you really want to control your server, not go into a SaaS type environment, you're probably going to 21C. 21C comes in a couple different flavors, same code base underneath, but most people think of 21C as being something you get on the marketplace and running it on OCI, so Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. There actually is Essbase 21C that's kind of server anywhere. It is independent. So wherever your data center is, your data center could be on-prem, could be hosted, could be up in the cloud, could be whatever, could be Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. You just want to take control and do it yourself. You can also use Essbase 21c for that. So it's going to be able to run in those on-prem servers, those hosted servers, those cloud servers. Speaking of cloud servers,
okay, wait. Does that mean that I can run that on my my Windows server?
You totally can inside of a Linux Docker box. Yeah, as long as you have a Linux virtual machine, you can run it on anything you want. Yes, it is Linux, as I'm going to explain multiple times over the next few slides. Linux for 21c. So to Glenn's point, the only way to get it to run on Windows is if you run it in Linux in Windows. So yeah.
Now they have promised us a Windows version early fall.
I would use the word promise in air quotes, but yes, promised us an Essbase version in Q3 or Q4. It's kind of roughly what they're aiming for. So what if I don't have a bunch of other EPM applications? What if I really just have, it's, yes, Essbase traditionally runs in the finance at my company. I've got, 3, 4, 5, 6 Essbase cubes out there. Do I have to go to EPM on the cloud and then separately go to Essbase on OCI? And if I run it on Essbase and OCI, that's more platform as a service. Nobody really operates it for me. What do I do?
Okay, there's a solution. So Edward, I would say it a different way. What happens if I have a bunch of EPM cloud applications, but I want to include Essbase with it?
Both of those are validly true. Yes. So if I have EPM and Essbase, or I don't want to separate it out and have separate Essbase from EPM, what is my option? Essbase Freeform. So it goes by a bunch of different names for about like a week. And I was corrected on this a couple weeks ago. For like about a week, it was called Freeform Planning. Most people then started calling it just Freeform. Some people called it Essbase Freeform. Now, most of the time it goes by Freeform Apps. It is an option inside of EPM Cloud Enterprise. So if you have EPM Cloud Enterprise, so not the standard edition that's more for kind of small to mid-sized businesses, assuming that you've got the big thing that includes everything, EPM Cloud Enterprise, it supports something called Freeform Apps. And Freeform Apps, it's an application, it's a Essbase cube that doesn't require all those standard dimensions that normal traditional like Oracle planning or Oracle financial consolidation does. It is Essbase in the cloud, just in SaaS form. So Oracle maintains the servers. Oracle deals with if the whole thing crashes. Oracle deals with the performance and managing it. You have all of your normal access. So you can actually take and migrate your native Essbase reporting cubes up to these Freeform apps. There's even a straight Essbase OTL migration option. So you can take a cube, whether it's BSO or ASO or hybrid, and you can just build it up into that dimension, that open definition model that sits up there inside of Oracle Cloud EPM Enterprise Edition. There are no required dimensions. Hybrid, if you create a brand new one, hybrid's going to be on by default because of the Essbase that's operating up in the cloud environment really does a ton of things with hybrid and hybrid optimizations. It's going to be using hybrid, web or smart view. So it's not just a normal Essbase cube where pretty much you're aiming Excel or like applied OLAP or Dodeca at it. All that web functionality that you see through Oracle EPM, so like web forms, you get those, you just get them on top of your brand new Essbase cube. So you can control security, you can get it to do it advanced formatting, like all those things you get through the web with the other Oracle EPM applications, you get that now on top of Essbase. So you'll have access to Calc Manager and forms and approvals and Smart Push. You just have massive amounts of dimensions, massive amounts of members per dimensions. If you're an Oracle EPM Enterprise customer, this is kind of a no-brainer. Go ahead and turn on the Freeform application, take your existing Essbase models, move them up. Because if you're already an EPM Cloud Enterprise customer, no additional cost whatsoever. You can just go up into that world. There's a small limitation right now, and I hesitate to even tell you what it is because it's going away pretty soon. Currently, you are allowed one of these Freeform cubes per pod, which is fine if you have, let's say 3 cubes. You kind of get, because with Enterprise, you get multiple pods anyway. So you can kind of put one per. It's more problematic if you get like 5 or 10. They're upping it to, and they'll still handle all the performance. There's still no additional charge for it. They're going to deal with the requirements of the size and the scaling and everything on the back end. They're going to up that one limitation to 12, which covers, I will say, 97% of the Oracle EPM customers out there. If you're a customer like, I don't know, a Walmart or an Anthem where you've got, or Kroger, we've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cubes, the 12 thing might still be a limiting factor, but it's going to take the limits off for all but a very, very few specific type of customers that are out there. So please have a look at it if you haven't. It's actually really cool to take maybe an Essbase cube that you've got that you were just able to spreadsheets at, take that OTL, import it in, export and import the data in, see it up there in freeform applications, but then be able to do things like aim web forms at it and use Calc Manager and see forms aimed at it, have approval access. It's a very, very cool interface, and I strongly recommend either examine it yourself if you have access to Oracle EPM Enterprise. If you don't, email me or Glenn. We'll be happy to walk you through it, or find somebody else that can walk you through it, because it's super cool. But okay. Back to standalone Essbase. So let's talk Essbase 21C. There have actually been a few versions of Essbase between Essbase 11.124, which is what most people consider to be the last built for on-prem version. So the last built for on-prem version is 11.124 with several patches after it. Between that and 21C, there actually were versions in the middle. There actually was a super hidden version 12, and I say super hidden because it only came with, God, I'm going to forget the name now. Oracle, was it Business Intelligence Foundation Services? It was okay. Yeah, Glenn has to keep me honest, and we have to keep each other honest. We'll keep forgetting things. That's how we know we're getting old. But when OBIEE version 12 came out, it came bundled with 12C. When 12C came out, it came bundled with Essbase. There was a 12 version that came out in that. That one I don't really count because nobody really ran it directly. The first version people really ran directly in the cloud that added a bunch of cool new features was OAC Essbase, Essbase running on Oracle Analytics Cloud. After that version came Essbase 19C, which is when Oracle finally realized after 12 plus years, Essbase really was a database. They sent it over to the database team, and they added a bunch of functionality for 19C.
Are you sure they didn't send it to the database team?
Isn't that what I meant to say? Was it went from the analytics team to the database?
No. You say database.
Oh, oh yeah. No, sorry. I'm from the Northwest. We say things like you carry things in a bag and you get a pop. But anyway. So there are some things that happened in 21C, some things that both kind of moved ahead and some things where they said, yeah, we're going to kind of turn off some older products. So just like when Essbase 11 came out, eventually it dropped support for Essbase integration services because there was a better solution with Essbase Studio. There's a better solution than Essbase Studio now. It actually is built in. All that drill through that we mostly use Studio for, all that drill through is now built into the base product. It's actually a lot more functional than Studio drill through ever was. You can do things like creating multiple drillable regions. What other cool things are in Essbase now that weren't there in Studio? Glenn agrees. He's thinking. He'll think for a little while on that one. You're on mute for what it's worth. He's probably answering.
Yeah, no, I know. No, the biggest deal about Studio is the drill through. That's what people were really using it for. I mean, they touted it as being able to build your dimensions directly from your relational sources and make it more IT friendly, but really it was for drill through.
So there's just your number one thing to remember. If you've been using Studio, it's gone. You just need to migrate that, kind of recreate it inside the base product. Second thing that's a change, this actually should have been on by default years ago, but they were trying not to mess up people that had old time 8-bit Essbase cubes. Any Essbase cube transferred to 21C is Unicode enabled. So, full long strings, everything else. If you migrate a BSO cube to 21C, it's going to get hybrid functionality automatically. It's on by default in the 21C platform. You might not know that though, because most likely your Essbase cube on-prem, if it was BSO, probably had stored upper level sparse dimension members. So you might not notice that you're getting hybrid. Some people, to optimize, might do things like take a small sparse dimension and dynamic calc it, make their blocks smaller, or they might, maybe make the top level of all their sparse ones dynamic. When you carry that over, you get that hybrid functionality. If you truly want to take advantage of it, you need to go make those sparse dimensions that you're storing those upper level members right now. You need to make those fully dynamic. If you're afraid of hybrid, that's long. That concept is from years ago, where a ton of things started blanking out. A ton of things, it would just take forever and kind of revert to an internally slow-mo to calculate. For the vast majority of what 97% of the people do 97% of the time, it is now built in. Hybrid is what we recommend. It's why they've turned it on by default. Until recently, there was no EAS within the product, and there's still not what I would call full EAS. They were trying to migrate you. EAS, Essbase Administration Services, was trying to be an easy migration from Essbase Application Manager, and there's some holdovers that are just carried across through those. It's not how you would ever build a user interface in 2021. Well, they didn't want to rebuild it. They're like, we're not going to rebuild EAS again for a 21C. What they found was it's hard for admins who know where to go click on it in the old version. So they actually went to some effort to create an EAS Lite. It is not guaranteed to be here forever. It's meant to be a short-term bridge. It's a switch to the online UA, or the new online user interface. You can take advantage of the new Essbase stuff, things like sandboxes. Once you do convert an outline from kind of the EAS mode to kind of the UI type mode, you can't go back. You can see files from EAS Lite in the new UI, you just can't alter them. And there's kind of one of these EAS Lite instances per Essbase instance. I'll have Glenn show you this in a second, but I'm just going to high level touch on a couple of things, and I'll let Glenn show it to us until about 10 minutes left in the hour. There's also, within the UI, if you saw an older version of it, it's been getting a whole lot better. I actually really like the web UI. Slow to change, but once I did, I'm happy. Any brand new person's going to love the UI compared to the old EAS. Someone's going to send us shipping details. That sounds super cool. Look at this computer voice like in my head. Nobody else can hear it, but I assure you it's inside my brain. Anyway, there's an improved outline editor. You can run your calcs, run your report scripts, your MDX. You can all run it directly from the editor. You can search the calc alphabetically. You can load data with multiple data files, which is really nice. We used to have that. There's an improved dimension build editor. There's an improved data load rule editor. The outline editor, you can now do things like see your number of children, your attributes, the columns are resizable. You can change which columns you view in the settings. You can change the column order. You can more easily see your consolidation operators. And you can now validate an outline, just like on-prem. So Glenn, can you just really quickly, I will stop sharing and turn it over to you. And you can show off what I just talked about at a high level.
Certainly I can. If I can get to the right screen. Okay, so the first thing is EAS, and it's called EAS Lite, and there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, really the only things that you're going to be doing with EAS Lite is things that are database specific. So if I need to do things like copy and paste between outlines or that type of functionality, I'm going to do it in EAS, but I can't do things like security or manage logs or other things in it. But it looks and acts just like the EAS that we know and love today. But in order for this to work, you actually have to turn it on in the user interface. And once you've turned it on, so you can turn it on initially once you've imported a cube or created a cube. But if you turn it off, you can't turn it back on again. Because when you turn it off, you gain the functionality that is available in the web UI that is not available in EAS. So you can see I have three applications here, ASO sample, sample EAS, and test that are EAS enabled. And I actually have a bug that we found in our system. It should have a little thing up here that says EAS to tell me that it's an EAS cube. I just got the workaround for fixing that. So But when I go into something like the outline, what it's going to tell me is that it's going to be read only or view only, because they don't want me changing it here, because if I do, it's going to mess it up for being able to be used in EAS. So once I've converted it, this goes away and I can edit it. And really they say that we only want to do EAS. Initially, it's supposed to be going away. Don't bet on it. That's just my my take. But really, you should learn the web UI and you should learn Cube Designer in order to be able to do what you want to be able to do. There's a lot of new feature functionality in 21C. One of the biggest things is the outline editor. They've truly enhanced it over the previous versions if you were on OAC or 19C. First of all, we have a verify button back, yay, because before it would just save the outline and not tell you that you had any issues and you had to go through the log to be able to do it. One of the things I really like about this is I can actually take and decide what columns I want to be able to, excuse me, what I want to be able to see, and I can put them in the order that I like. So I have all of these columns here that I'm being able to use. I can edit directly from here in order to do whatever I need. If I don't like this panel, I can go back to the 19C panel on the right-hand side. For some reason, I tend to like this for doing a bunch of stuff, but I can do it multiple different ways. They've added things back in, like the number of children that you have, the, you know, what the attributes are on it, all of those kind of things into the outline editor. They really have made this pretty good. One of the really cool things is this is a block storage cube, and notice how this whole dimension for product is being stored. I can actually just right mouse click on it, and if I want to turn this into a hybrid cube or partial hybrid, I can tell it to just set the hierarchy to dynamic. Maybe I just want to do that for my East market. So I could do that as well. So I could just click on that and that would just make part of my hierarchy dynamic to make it into a hybrid cube. So they've added a lot of nice feature and functionality in here. If I go into the outline properties, I can set up my dynamic time series here. I can set up my text and date measures, all of the things that I need to do in order to deal with building my outline. One of the, and I'm going to cancel out of here, one of the other big changes that they've made in here is in the load rules. In 19C and in OAC Essbase, data load rules and dimension build rules were a bit clunky. Now here, if I go into the rules, and I'm going to create a dimension build rule, maybe we'll see. And now what I get to do is I get to give it a name, and I can choose what kind of source that I'm using. And so I'm going to choose here a file right now, and I'm going to select my file. Oops, I didn't want that one. I wanted to go to the catalog, sorry. And let's go to market. And so now I can actually preview the data to say, okay, did I screw up and should this be comma delimited or should this be tab delimited? If I made a mistake, I could come back here and I could change it here and I can tell it how many lines to skip, that type of thing. If I want to just use it, then I come in here, and I love this editor much better than I liked EAS because I can do things directly here. So this is the market dimension. I pick market, it fills everything in for me. And this is a parent child. So I can say parent and child, and maybe I want to skip this column. And this is a UDA. So I can actually even type in here say it's a UDA on the child member. And this, notice I got multiple alias tables. So this is my Chinese alias, I think. And then I can go through here and I can set all of that. I'm not going to save this. I'm just going to close it. But it really improved. I could do this something similar with data load rules. And I think I've got a data file out here. Because I didn't save it, I can do that again. Oh, fine, I already have that one. See if I have a data file. We'll use that one. So again, I can preview it. I can see that everything looks the way that I want it to, so I'm going to go ahead and proceed. This looks similar, but it's a little bit different. So now I can come in here and it's going to give me my tree structure. I can say, okay, well, this is my product dimension. And it's, you know, I don't actually have to come over here and look. I can come here and because of previewing the data for me. And I'm going to go ahead and say next. And this is my market dimension. Next, this is my period, my year dimension. Next, this is my scenario. And then, ooh, I got this. What is this? Well, this is my data field. So I'm going to tell it it's a data field. And now I can actually do things like I could say, well, I want the minimum value. So if I have multiple rows that have the same intersection of data, I can tell it I want the minimum, the maximum, the sum, or the count. If I don't select any of this, it's automatically going to do the sum, but yes and no. What it's going to do is it's going to go back and say, okay, are you doing an add values or are you doing a replace values? And that's done in the source properties. If I'm doing a sum, I mean, if I'm doing a replace, then it's going to go ahead and do a replacement. Now, if I only have one column here that's data, I just click here and it will put in the data. If I have multiples, like if this was January, February, March, April, I wouldn't check that. And then I would say Jan, Feb, March, etc. So they really have, sorry, thought through a lot of this. And now, oh, and actually this one, I actually had multiple columns, so I wouldn't use data. So they've thought through this, and before I couldn't type in a name here. Now I could actually just type this in. This is sales. This is COGS, et cetera, et cetera. And if I really wanted to, if I wanted to change this, I can come back in here and say, well, I wanted to do a sequel or I wanted to do file, and I could pull in a different file. So they really have enhanced the way that the web UI works. They've also enhanced, excuse me, Cube Designer and a lot of other things to make it more functional, more usable, easier to do. As a matter of fact, one of the stupidest things that we didn't have available in OAC or 19C is I couldn't rename an application or a database. I'd actually have to copy it and then, you know, copy it to a new name and then delete the old one and do all this. Now I actually get things like renames, and there's other little features in here about importing alias tables and doing other things. So they have made our life better. Edward, is there anything else that you really want to see?
No, that's perfect. I'll talk through some of the features now, some of the other things that are there in 21C.
Okay, I stopped sharing.
Much appreciated, Glenn Schwartzberg. Just 1 second and I will reshare. It's not quite as easy as you'd think. One pause.
Can we just dance a little bit?
You feel free, turn on that video and you break. So within 21C, and some of this appeared in earlier versions as well, but there's a lot of improvements. So if you've been living in an 11.124 world, realize 11.124 came out 6 years ago or 7. I feel like 7, but I might be off by a year. Since then, you now see in 21C things like the concept of federated partitions, where in federated partitions, you can have an empty Essbase cube. So all of your users see Essbase like it's normally Essbase, but it's really data stored in Oracle ADW. So often an autonomous data warehouse database is all of your information, your data, your detail, and really Essbase becomes just kind of a presentation layer on top of autonomous data warehouse. That capability only works if you're running it in cloud. Think of it as like a release 1 with enhancements to come. But if you have or want to get into Oracle Autonomous Data Warehouse, you now have that ability to use all of its scalability. If a bunch of your data is already over there, it makes sense to keep it there and not replicate it up into an Essbase world. It gives you real-time data with dataless cubes without having to rebuild a single spreadsheet, a single front end, because it still thinks it's talking to Essbase. Essbase 21C just has the magic to go talk to that relational database under the scenes. As I said before, all the cubes are hybrid now. There are some really interesting new enhancements. One of my favorite ones is shadow cubes, where think of it as
don't tell them too much. I'm doing a presentation in 2 weeks on that on this webcast.
Ooh, I'll do a teaser for Glenn Schwartzberg's webcast in 2 weeks. Think of it like an active, your database stays active while magic happens behind the scenes. And then to the users, it becomes that transparent shadow cube then becomes kind of your real cube. How does that magic occur? Join Glenn Schwartzberg at this same time in 2 weeks, and he will walk you through it. There is WebLogic security, shared service integration that kind of works on that independent flavor only. They've added, I think, back in the currency conversion module, which was.
So can we go back just WebLogic for a second?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so in 21C independent, remember that's your on-prem or install anywhere version. You actually have 2 different security models available to you now. The first one is WebLogic security, and that's the one that they're actually recommending, which can federate back to your Active Directory and do all of that stuff. But if you're really used to shared services, they will allow you to install a standalone shared services instance that will work just for Essbase 21C. It's not shared with your EPM 11.2 instance, but you can do your security through shared services as well. But that's not in the marketplace cloud. That's only on the independent install.
Very good. What else? As we said, you can now kick off your calcs and your report scripts directly from the editor. You can now see all of your substitution variables in a single place. You now have the ability to delete the application, the server logs kind of on demand. There's a function selector in the calc editor. You can cluster your Essbase servers together. They've enhanced the cube designer. What am I forgetting? Oh, hybrid, 2nd generation. I would even go beyond that. Let's go with 3.0 of hybrid. You can now do really complex top-down context-dependent formulas and data-driven calculations. All that is there in a hybrid. So if you've ever been shy about using hybrid before for anything but kind of a simple rack and stack database, hybrid is the strategic direction for Oracle. That's where all the investment, all the time is going. They don't want you ever to go, should this be a block storage cube? Should this be an aggregate storage cube? They want you not to have to worry about it. Just make a hybrid cube. It'll use BSO at the bottom level, ASO at the top level. It'll do it all on its own. Things to remember. Number 1 about Essbase 21C, as we said earlier, it is Linux. Second, it is customer managed. You install it, you apply the patches, you deal with it. The same way you probably dealt with your Essbase on-prem stuff now, you're just dealing with it up there. There is an OCI install that you can get on the Oracle Marketplace. There is the ability, though, to run it both on OCI, or like we said, you can run that independent flavor and run it on-prem. If you don't want to ever have to deal with your servers again, this is not a sales pitch. I'll give you a brief, super brief sales pitch in a second. We do have an offering in Enroll where we'll tackle running Essbase as a service for you. So we'll handle all those administration, those maintenance type activities so that you don't have to worry about it. So it basically takes Essbase standalone and puts it into a SaaS type environment. I will tell you that in terms of the future, Essbase has an extensive roadmap. For instance, we talked about earlier, we're going to get Windows installs sometime, could be late Q2, more likely Q3. If you wanted to hedge your bets, you'd say Q4, but fall roughly timeframe, we're going to get a Windows version. We have a whole lot of functionality. There's a lot more waiting to be added. Whatever version you're on, make your plans. If you're going to have Essbase standalone, to move to Essbase 21C. If you're an Oracle EPM customer, if you want to be an Oracle EPM customer, move to Oracle EPM Enterprise, move your stuff up there. If you're going to move standalone to 21C, just figure out which flavor you want to do. Do you want to do OCI, or do you want to do that independent flavor, which again, right now, Linux only. If you do go the independent OCI route, call me. If you have any questions about running Essbase as a service, I'll tell you what that offering looks like. Essbase is being used by approximately, either directly or by people going through pre-built applications, over 3 million people worldwide. And that user base is continuing to grow. They are building it's not just the EPM applications. There are, I've lost track, 20 plus other applications that within Oracle, whenever they needed a number with something in the rows of the columns, they're building that in Essbase. So Oracle financials, for instance, if you're on, we use Big Fusion, if you're back there on a financials cube, that is an Essbase cube behind the scenes. I won't give you a sales pitch because looking around, most of you 155 have been around here for a while either. George has a question if you want to tackle it. Glenn, it came up through the Q&A. So from an Interrel standpoint, our name has changed slightly. We're now Argo Interrel. We're still dedicated to the EPM analytics side of things. That's what we do. That's what we're good at. That's what we want to focus on. I will tell you something super fun that happened though. As part of becoming Argo, we wanted to make sure that all the companies joining were really as good as they said they were. So there's an independent company that you probably have heard of if you've ever heard of a Net Promoter Score. It's an independent company called Blue Ridge came in, and you basically look at your whole client list and they randomly pick customers and they start calling them, asking if they would recommend you. We have what they said was within the companies they've evaluated, one of the highest Net Promoter Scores they've ever seen. If you don't appreciate what a 77 Net Promoter Score is, they actually had to double check their people they asked at the beginning. Your average global systems integrator has a Net Promoter Score of 9. Your average systems integrator has a Net Promoter Score of 24. You're considered best in class if you have a 50. You're considered world class if you have a 70. Nordstrom has a 75, and this is my humble brag for the day. We have a 77. That's the entirety of the commercial. As I was plugging earlier, because I'm told it is awesome, and probably one of the top 2 webcasts at Kscope was Glenn Schwartzberg's Shadow in the Dark, What Are Shadow Cubes? Please listen to that in 2 weeks. We have Opal Alapat talking next week about EPM reporting for the 21st century. We have customized financial consolidation and close to help you go beyond what's in the box, do your own custom calcs. That'll be 8.4. And then we're going into a bit of more industry specific. So if you're in the manufacturing or manufacturing adjacent industries like consumer packaged goods, we have something for that on the 11th. In honor of Shark Week, I wanted to give a shout out to the creator of the original Shark crossover, the Fonz. And now we can claim, Glenn, you and I have officially jumped the shark. Thank you.
That means our program is dying.
Okay. Thank you.
So there was one question that wasn't asked, but everybody wants to ask it anyway.
Yeah.
And that's when should I use 21C and when should I use EPM Cloud? And that's a very long discussion itself. But one of the big deciding factors that I use is if the same users are going to be using EPM as 21C, then, or I mean as Essbase, then I would say to use EPM Cloud and freeform apps. If it's a completely different set of users, you need to look at the cost justification of adding those users into EPM Cloud versus bringing up an Essbase 21C instance.
Yeah, and I'll further add that there are some functionality differences. You know, there are definitely some things in 21C. You know, so if you want things like shadow cubes, you're going with 21C at the moment. If you want things like the ability to put forms in the web and all that other stuff on top, that'll drive you over there as well. But I agree with what Glenn had to say. And on that note, I couldn't close it out any better. Long live Essbase, may she forever reign. Thank you, everybody. Have an awesome rest of your week.
Okay, Edward, don't close down because I'm going to answer a couple more questions.
Sounds cool. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, so how difficult is it to migrate from OAC Essbase to 21C on OCI? Is it a major effort? The answer is no. You stand up the instance. There's actually a migration utility that will take and zip up your entire OAC instance into a huge zip file. You load that onto your 21C instance, you unzip it, and as long as it's in the same tenant, security and everything else just gets restored. So it's actually pretty easy. And then your automation, you basically just have to change what server you're pointing at. Pretty straightforward.
You should still totally call a consultant for help, like us, but yeah.
So there are other considerations, like features that you couldn't use in OAC, like drill through and data sources and other things, but yeah. Have you found anything customers were doing as administrative?
Oh wait, just to add to that last one, we haven't seen any hiccups like going from Essbase on-prem to like OAC Essbase, or like some of the Hyperion migrations have been in the past, like anything involving System 9 or going to 11. Glenn was touching on the end before I rudely interrupted him. The biggest change you're gonna have to make is along those kind of integration side of things, where you might be having like path file names or whatnot, because obviously everything is going to move, but that's kind of going to happen in a lot of server cases. You're just kind of now using OCI as that server environment. And then the last question that next one we have submitted for Glenn was from Carolyn. Have you found anything customers are doing administratively to support Essbase that couldn't be addressed with Freeform?
So, yeah, I mean, when you go into Freeform, the whole administration, everything changes because you're using planning administration. So you can't use your Maxell scripts. You actually have to convert it all to data management or EPM automate. And some of the things that people were doing behind the scenes, like their own shadow cube type of thing, you can't do in Freeform planning. You could convert it to shadow cubes in 21C, but that's it. And I will be honest with you, I'm an Essbase guy, I'm not an EPM guy. So we have actually a different group of people who convert things to Freeform. So I haven't done it personally, so I can't tell you if there's anything that we haven't been able to do. I'd have to ask one of my planning guys.
Question on, and I will go ahead and tackle this one. I'm migrating EPM 11.124 to EPM 11.2. What options do I have for Essbase standalone 11.124, migrating that to Essbase 21C and keeping it integrated with EPM 11.2, for instance, FDME, HFM, and whatnot? If you don't want to run Essbase 21C underneath like planning or something, you can totally do that, provided you have the licensing to do it. You actually have to have a standalone Essbase license to do this. But if you have an Essbase license either directly or through Planning Plus or through Business Intelligence Foundation Suite, yes, you can take Essbase, move it to 21C, and you can export and import to it through all the tools you're used to exporting and importing to. What you cannot do, and I want to clarify this one, you can't go stand up a standalone Essbase 21C server and have it operate underneath 11.1.2, like have it be the Essbase cube for planning and whatnot at the moment. That is on the roadmap. It's going to be in, what was it, 11.2.7 or something like that, when you'll be able to do that. But provided you're talking about more standalone things like connecting it, sending that back and forth to HFM, you're fine. It's nothing but another server. And final question from George. Do you recommend moving on-prem cubes to classic planning cubes in Oracle Cloud EPBCS? First of all, terminology thing. There really isn't a PBCS and EPBCS anymore. It's just kind of Oracle Cloud planning. But your question is really, do you recommend moving the on-prem cubes to kind of classic planning cubes inside of it? No, honestly, it depends. It's a standard consultant answer, but normally not as a general rule. If you're using traditional on-prem cubes and you've done things like a workforce planning cube, and you've done a CapEx cube, and you've done a project cube, those cubes, yes, you could theoretically export those out, import them into kind of a classic site over on Oracle Cloud Planning. Don't. The way that it used to build like workforce and CapEx and projects was just a pain in the arse. Don't do it. Rebuild it now in the new environment. If you have a standalone cube and you don't want any of that pre-built functionality, then yeah, go ahead and move it over over on the planning side of things. But if you're using any of the pre-built modules, which a lot of people are, they go, oh, well, I was told I could just export out those and import them. You can, just don't. Rebuild them, take advantage of the functionality. The way workforce CapEx, projects, there's now a financial one that's out there that's amazing. All this stuff we used to have to custom build or was in those horrible modules, a lot of that's pre-built now. Strongly look at that when you move up to the cloud. And unless there's anything you want to add, Glenn Schwartzberg, that's an awesome question to close on.
That sounds great to me. If you do run into other questions, just email info@inrel.com and Edward and I or somebody else will answer you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. info@inrel.com. Thanks, everybody. Have an awesome week.